So for this week's project, we're going to use conductive thread and other sewing supplies to make light up electric sewing projects. Now, I'm going to lead you through one project, this light up bracelet, but you can really use this thread and these lights and batteries to make all sorts of things. You can do it on fabric, you can do it on paper. There's lots of ways that you could do this and really just bounded by your imagination. Now, I'm going to admit up front, I am not an expert sewer. I am not going to do an amazing job of sewing all these components together, but they are going to work. And it is a cool way of using electronics onto soft things. So if you wanted to add lights onto a Halloween costume, or if you wanted to add lights onto an ugly holiday sweater, or if you wanted to add lights onto your backpack just for the fun of it, then you can absolutely do that with just a few tools that are in these kits. Here's my example, and you can see there's a few things here. One, this is a coin cell battery. So this is a little battery holder that we're going to sew into the fabric. And you can see this is the battery that goes into it. And then I have an LED light, and that light is sewn into the fabric. I have two parts of a snap. And you can see right now they're not connected. And so my light isn't lighting up because these two parts of the snap are going to function as a switch. When I snap the parts together, the ends together to make a bracelet, then the light is going to light up and it's going to look something like this. And there's my bracelet. Now you can put multiple lights on here. It doesn't just have to be one. As you get a little bit more comfortable with sewing, you can start creating whatever kind of circuit pathways that you want to do all sorts of different configurations of lights. And obviously, if you enjoy this, there's tons of different components out there that you can buy, switches and sound devices and sensors of all sorts that you can sew together to make actual electronic things that are on your clothing, which is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. So there's my bracelet. Now I'm going to show you how I made it. So what I have is a strip of felt here. Obviously that felt is going to roll around to make the bracelet part. I have a needle. This is a pretty thick sewing needle, which are thread, which is conductive thread, meaning that it has little metallic strands in there so that it can conduct electricity, is pretty fat. So it has to have a big needle in order to get through there. I have this nifty little device, which is very hard to see in the video, but it's going to help me pull the thread through the needle. So I'll show you how to use that. And then we have our components. This is, I'm going to have a red bracelet and a green bracelet, so maybe I could like hold my wrist up and go, stop, go, whatever. Here's my green LED. Here is my battery holder. Here is my snap, and you can see my snap actually has two parts. When I pop that out, one has this little ball that sticks up there, which goes into the socket on the other part of my snap, and that's going to affect how your bracelet actually works. For instance, in this one, I put them both on the top of the bracelet, so when I need to attach it, I have to kind of roll my snap that way. I'm going to sew it differently on my second one so that this is pointed the other way so it snaps more like that. And this is how we learn, is by doing it once and then doing it again. I also have my coin cell battery and I have a pair of scissors. Now, this is the conductive thread. You're not going to be able to have an entire roll of this just for yourself. So you're going to cut chunks of it off for each part of your project. So I'll give you some estimates as to how much you need. There's tons of thread for each group, so you can go ahead and overestimate. That way you don't come up short on your sewing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start from one end and go to the other. And now the important thing about electronics and electricity, particularly with LEDs, is that it has to flow in a circle. If I had this LED flipped around so that it was sewed the other way, this circuit is not going to work because LEDs have an indoor and an outdoor, a positive and a negative, and electricity can only flow through in one direction. So on these, you can see that the white is the negative and needs to be sewed to the white part of the battery, and the black is the positive and needs to be sewed to the colored part of the battery holder. And that, of course, is not directly happening. It's coming through here, and when I fold that around, then it is making a direct connection with the battery. So it's important, if you sew everything together and you discover that your LED isn't turning on, it's probably that you have it sewed backwards. And the nifty thing is, we can just snip all this, tear it out, and flip the LED around and do it again. So let's start this off. I'm going to start with my snap. So I'm going to take the two parts of my snap together off. I'm going to keep this little ball part, and I'm going to put it on the back of my bracelet. At this point, it doesn't really matter which way is the front or the back, but I'm going to imagine that this is the back of my bracelet. And one thing that you can do, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but you might want to actually mark out on the back of your bracelet where your sewing parts are going to go. So I'm going to have my snap right here. Use a different marker here. I have my snap right here, and I'm going to create a circuit that goes there, and I'm going to have that. This, of course, would be happening on the other side, but this way it's not visible. I'm going to have my battery pack here. Okay, and if I run the stitching to the positive side of my battery, so let's say this comes over here, then I'm going to need to have another wire from the other side. So you can see these two circles are marked as white, and these two circles have a little sort of tan color there. So I'm going to then mark my next circuit here. And because this would be my colored part, I would connect that to the colored part of my LED. So that's about where my LED is going to go. And then I would connect this to my last part, which is my snap. Now, of course, these three pieces are all going to be on the other side of the bracelet, but this will help me visualize my circuit. So, first thing, I need to get a little bit of thread into my needle. And this is where I'm going to take, you can see the amount of distance that my thread needs to go. It's not a huge amount of distance, but you always want a little extra thread. So I'm going to cut almost 3 times as much as I actually need to make that pathway. So here's my needle. Here is my little needle threader. And I'm going to take this little thin sort of wire shape here, and I'm going to put it through the eye of the needle. And you see how it kind of will grab on there? That's because it's a little bit wider in the middle, and it'll hold its place. Now I'm going to take my thread, and I'm going to stick that, make a little, it's going to go through the wire, and I'm going to hold it like that. And now I can use that to pull the thread through the eye of the needle. Now, these things are fairly delicate. These little wires can just pop right out. So you don't want to pull hard. You want to pull just gently. And if it feels like you're getting resistance, that probably means that the thread is not going right through the eye of the needle. And so you just want to wiggle it around until the thread will go through the eye. Now you can do this without this tool. People do it all the time, but with a very fat thread like this, it's kind of difficult. And you'll also notice that this thread has a tendency to fray at the end, which then becomes even harder to get through the eye of that needle. You can take some scissors and snip that off, and then it's a little bit less frayed, which sometimes is easier to get through the eye of the needle, but I would definitely use this, but just be gentle with it so that it doesn't break. So here's my threaded needle, and I'm going to start sewing. And what I want to do is I'm going to sew around this snap a bunch of times One, to make sure that the snap is nice and secure, but two, I want to make a really good contact between this conductive thread and this snap. And so I'm going to go down, I'm going to loop around, I'm going to go into this other hole. Nope, that's not what I want to do. I'm going to go the other side and go through the hole. So I want to kind of find it until it comes up through that hole. Okay, and just to make sure that it doesn't fall out, I'm going to go ahead and take this extra bit and I'm going to tie a knot. You know what? I'll make it a double knot. You don't have to do this because you could just loop it a whole bunch of times, but this is not a bad way to start so that it doesn't pull through and then you've kind of got nothing sewed and you got to start over again. So I'm going to then go down through that hole. Okay, and this is just adding lots of connection. You can see, you can't see where you're going here, but if you kind of poke around, oh, I found it. So I can go up through that hole. Maybe I'll go down through this hole. People who really know what they're doing, they do this in a particular way, but you know, we're just building a little fun bracelet here, so we don't have to get too worried about the details. So now I've gone up and down a few times. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Now I'm going to make my stitch over to where my battery is going to be. And I made a lot of dots, but I'm not going to sew every single one of those dots. That's a lot. So I'm going to do that, and I'll flip it here. Go down. Ooh, look, I hit my line really well right there. That's not going to happen every time. And I think I'm getting close enough now that I can actually, remember we put our snap on the back of the bracelet. So now we're going to put our other components on the front of the bracelet. And I am going to sew this into the negative part of the bracelet. So if you see, I'm going to basically stitch around and around and around this little circle that has the white ring around it, and that's the negative part of my battery. So I'm just going to go over it and down, and then I'm going to come back up. Getting a little close to the edge there. That's why it's good to have some extra, because you need to have enough to pull through with your needle. Bring it back up. And I think I've gotten as far as I can go there. So you can see I got probably 2 or 3 loops around the edge of that battery. That'll do pretty good. And now I'm going to tie a little knot there, and I'm going to show you a trick how to get your knot as close to the component as possible. So I'm just going to tie a loop here. I'm not going to pull it tight, right? There's a little loop there. I'm going to use my needle. I'm going to stick it in the loop, and I'm going to use that to kind of push that loop down and then pull up, and then I'll pull my needle out. And that's going to get my loop really close to the surface of the felt rather than kind of hanging out here, which won't do me much good in terms of holding it in place. And I think I'll make another loop like that. I think next time I'm going to get a longer piece of thread, because that will probably make this a little bit easier. All right, and then I can snip off my extra. Now again, this may not work out for you the first time. You may not have a long enough piece of thread, like I almost didn't have a long enough piece of thread. So what do? Well, you just snip it with your scissors, start over again. The beauty of this is that it's a very forgiving medium. You can't sort of mess it up too much. You just cut some more thread, go at it a second time until you got it the way that you want it. So now I'm going to do the next part of my circuit, which is connecting the battery to my LED. So I'm going to start again just like I did. I'm going to stick my little threader in there. This time I'm just gonna, maybe make myself a little bit longer piece of thread just to be safe. There's tons of thread, so I'm not likely to run out of thread, and you're not likely to run out of thread. Conductive thread sticking out, so I'm going to trim those off. There's an extra piece. All right, I got my battery connected to my LED. Now I need to bring my LED over and connect it to my snap. And then when I connect the two parts of the snap, it's going to close the circuit and the light's going to light up. If I did everything right, we'll find out soon. Tied. All right, now in a minute we're going to find out if I made any mistakes or not. And like I said, I'm not an expert sewer. You look at that, that's not amazing, but it will work, I think. All right, so here's our battery pack, and you can see on the battery pack there's a little plus on the top part, and that means the positive side of this little coin cell battery is going to have to face the top part of our battery holder. So I can push this, it's got a little kind of splits open, or I can tear the cardboard to get it open. Okay, so there's my battery. And this is not like your regular AAA battery, which is kind of long and has a positive and a negative. This is obviously very flat, and it has a positive and a negative side. And so what I'm going to do is, like I said, positive goes facing up. So the smooth part is the positive, and it has a little plus on it, so that also helps. I'm going to stick that into the battery holder. Put that in there like that. And now if I did everything right, my light should light up when I snap my bracelet together. Not too shabby. Let's see if it fits. Oh yeah, there we go. So now I have a red bracelet, red light on one side, green light on the other side. We can play a really fun game of red light, green light, whatever you want to do. This could be, you could flip this around. Let's say you made it, instead of a bracelet, you put it around your hand like that. And look, I'm 1/3 of the way to an Iron Man costume. You could have one that goes on your chest with different colors. Hope you come up with some cool ideas to do with this project. Hope this gave you just enough of a sense of what you need to be able to do in order to put things together. But really, with sewing and these kinds of components, your imagination is the only limit. Happy sewing!